Good morning. Well, I'm excited to be here this morning to kick off today and talk about joy. And for those of you that were here yesterday, I wanted to tell you I have the answer to that pent-up demand consumer question that we heard from The Economist yesterday. So stay tuned. So when you think about the journey back to joy, you might be saying, why do I care? Why do I need to know about this? Well, the reason is that this data I'm going to show you became a leading indicator of restaurant sales and traffic during the pandemic. But before we can look forward, we do need to look back. Do you remember March of 2020? I'm sure we all do. We don't want to. But I want you to think back because we have to remember what we went through to be able to look forward. It was crazy. Do you remember the moment you found out with a stroke of a pen the world was going to change? Well, what happened in the consumer mindset is all of us, so take off your business hat for a minute. As a consumer, we were learning this new language. It was a scary language. It was quarantine, lockdown, shutdown, isolation, and we heard it every single day. Now, you guys, if you were in QSR, your hair was on fire because you had more demand you could think of. If you're in full service, you were trying to keep the lights on. But in the consumer world, this language was impacting us. Do you remember we were told stay home for 2 weeks? Turned into 2 years. We were told to stay home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. What happened? Do you remember how eerie the silence was? There was nobody in the streets. The industry that fills the air with joy, the soulfulness, was silent. And we had to figure out, how are we going to get through this? So I had this aha moment, and this is a very important message. When joy was greater than fear, the economic recovery could begin. When joy was greater than fear. So I started this passion project called The Journey Back to Joy, and I tried to figure out, how do I measure joy? This simple framework, I measured 52,000 consumers over the last 2.5 years to understand how the pent-up demand was going to be unleashed. So I want you to look at this. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go super fast. This is like an innovation curve. Who were the people that were going to lead the economic recovery? Who were the people that were going to wait behind and were too anxious? So I want to really quickly say, how many of you, put your consumer hat on, not your business hat, how many of you, when the doors opened in 2020, you're like, I am out there, I am just going to get back to all my normal activities? Raise your hand really quick. A lot of you. How many of you are just, I'm going to get out there, but I'm going to take it a little slow? That's where I was. Then we had people that were wait and see. They stayed at home. They didn't go out. They waited. Do you guys have family members maybe that were wait and see? Then we have the anxious and then very anxious. And what I will tell you, and this is November of 2022, there are still 17% of Americans that are anxious today due to COVID. So we are not completely there yet. So fast forward, where are we today? We have 2/3 of Americans that are saying, we've got to get over this. We've got to get back to our normal lives. But I want to ask you guys a quick question on this one. What percent of Americans do you guys think say today they're fully back to all of their activities? Shout something out. What do you guys think? 80? What else? Did I hear, I think I heard 50? Okay. Only 45% say they're fully back. And this data was from 2 weeks ago. So good news, that means there's a lot of pent-up demand, right? So there's part of the answer to that economic question yesterday. So when it comes to restaurants specifically, it's kind of the same story. Good news, 48% of Americans say, yes, I am back to my full restaurant frequency. But what that says is we still have a long way to go. So I see that as good news, because even though we've got another rough patch, there is still massive, massive pent-up demand that you guys can capture. But right now, it's just not that joyful out there, right? There's a lot of challenges that you guys are facing. And what the consumers are telling us, 70% of Americans today say prices are just too high. We have people that are saying labor, there's not enough staff. A new thing that I added to my survey, people aren't trained. People aren't trained. And we still find our favorite items aren't there when they go out to eat. So why should consumers get up off their sofas to come through the doors of your restaurant if it's not that joyful? So what can you do to make it more joyful for your customers? Now, what I want to talk about here is pause. I know I talk to a lot of my clients, CEOs, CFOs, and they're like, Lisa, it's tough out there. We have to raise our prices. But I will tell you that the value equation, we are in a race to nowhere with all the price increases because we're raising prices and we're not giving anything back in exchange for our value proposition. So think about, how do you take pricing and add value to your experience? And what the consumers are telling us today is their time has to be worth it. Is it worth my time? The great news is people are willing to spend money going out to eat for a joyful experience. But when it's not joyful, it's not worth it. This is also one of my favorite topics to share with you today. In the data that I have, you guys have heard of quiet quitting, the great resignation. While that has some merit, it actually is much deeper than that. It's called the great reassessment. And what happened is this data was perfectly predictable. What happened, though, is nobody imagined a filter where people would quit a job without having a job. And that's a filter that was pretty new. But what's happening is people aren't leaving companies, they're searching for something looking forward. And so what I would say is that if there's people officers, HR folks out there, this is your time to shine. Companies should be investing in their employees as much as they do consumer insights and understanding. You guys need to understand your employees' hopes, dreams, and wants as deeply as you understand your consumers. Because today, how can a consumer have a joyful experience if the employees are frazzled and grumpy? It just doesn't make sense. This last point is about changing the paradigm. I get a lot of questions that basically say, Lisa, when will people come back? And I say, they're not going to come back. And I get a puzzled look. And I say, it's a different model today. It takes 21 days to change a behavior. What do you think happened in 2 years? People's behaviors changed, and we have to think about it differently. We have to think about it as retrial. Retrial. And what does that mean? We have to give them a reason. Why did they fall in love with your brand in the first place? If you're opening a new restaurant as a grand opening, you think about that a little bit differently. You're introducing, it's a new market, it's a new opportunity. Your customers, a lot of them have forgotten about what it's like to come experience your brand. So I challenge you to think about how to think about retrial, and it's not about coming back. It's about reintroducing your brand to America and getting them re-engaged with your brand. So I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts. The first is, there's a profound impact that we are still working through relative to the physical and mental impact of that language of COVID. We are not fully through that as a country, so we need to work through that. The other thing is this notion of reintroducing your brand. I tell you, that is the biggest thing that you can work on today. The other is adding value. As I mentioned, we are in this race to nowhere for pricing, and I get it. I get the supply chain issues. I get the labor issues. It's things that you face every day. But when you're in those meetings trying to say, okay, we need to take price action, ask yourself, what can I give back? What can I add to that consumer experience so you're not just taking price? And then today is the day for those, the talent acquisition, the retention. Make your employees joyful. understand their hopes and wants and dreams. And I challenge you with this closing thought. If you can deliver joy with your employees and ultimately your customers, you will actually win the hearts, the loyalty, and share of wallet for your customers. So focus on joy. Thank you.